My name is Michelle Dunbar, and I co founded the Freedom Model for Addictions with Mark Sharon. Stephen Slate helped us write it. My dad started this with Mark in 1989. And he probably really started to think about the Freedom Model in 1986. That's probably when it began, because that was the year my grandfather died. His dad, a good Irishman named Bill Brown, was a World War II hero, veteran, never talked about it. But he struggled with heavy drinking probably his entire life, but I'm sure it got worse once he came back from Europe. And he was the opposite of my dad. He was this loving, caring, gentle man, like truly gentle man. And I could never imagine him at war killing people. Like, never could I imagine it. But he loved drinking. He was a heavy drinker, smoked cigarettes. He came and lived with us when I was young, stayed with us. During that time he stayed with us, it was from I think 76 to 1979 or 80 when we moved away. And he stayed back and we moved across the country to California. When he lived with us, he was sober. Dad had gone to get him out of a detox in Watertown, New York. And he told him, you can come and stay with us, but you can't drink while you're living here. Ironically, my father was a very heavy drinker at that time, at least for another year. And Gramps did it. He stayed abstinent as far as I know. Like, I don't ever remember him drinking when he lived with us. And we got close to him. He was wonderful. When we left and when Dad got sober, my dad got sober in 1977. He was a DWI accident. He was mandated to AA. Dad, like he does with everything, became the AA guru right off the rip, read a bunch of books. And really, his motivation for staying sober was to become a guru. And he was very heavily motivated by status and money, like so many men of the 1970s, I suppose. And we moved to California, and Gramps stayed back and started drinking again. When we came back from California, he was drinking heavily and we weren't allowed to see him anymore. It was the tough love era, right? And so you couldn't see him. The year I went away to college, he died right around Labor Day, and I'd seen him once. Well, I remember when I first learned how to drive, I went to see him and by myself. He was in this very dark building that was for elderly people and it's subsidized housing, and it was dark and dirty. And he was embarrassed. I remember him being embarrassed to talk to me. And he explained to me that he was an alcoholic, like my dad was, and that it was going to kill him. And that was probably less than maybe about 18 months before he died. He was just drinking himself to death. He had gotten thrown out of that place and died in a boarding house where nobody found him for like 4 or 5 days. They assumed he had died in DTs because this was before the days where you get alcohol delivered. This was a man who'd been in and out of detoxes, rehabs, treatment, VA hospitals since he got back from the war. I'm sure he had all kinds of trauma, PTSD. He believed alcohol was his answer. It was the panacea for him. It was his escape. He died because he didn't get the right information. And I think that was the catalyst for my dad questioning everything he'd learned about alcoholism. I think he started to question how he even got sober. Like, what was keeping him sober? Around the same time, of course, was away at college and I was partying. I discovered alcohol in my early teens, discovered it. I realized I had learned it had powers, right? It had the powers to make you the life of the party. It had powers to make you violent. It had powers to do all these things. It had powers to take over your life. I learned that alcohol was this all powerful thing and drugs were all powerful. I learned very early on that I was an alcoholic and an addict, and I had been born that way. And if I ever drank or touched drugs, ingested them, that I would be hooked. Now, here's what's ironic, though. I smoked cigarettes on and off, didn't get hooked, but it didn't occur to me. I just didn't like them. I did opiates, didn't really like them, not that much. I tried amphetamines, definitely didn't like them. So this whole idea of the addictive personality didn't really seem to fit, but I didn't question it. I went with what I had learned, that I was an alcoholic. And so as my substance use progressed and my behavior became more erratic, I went from being an athlete and a good student to those things didn't matter to me anymore. And you can say, oh, that's the powers of drugs and alcohol. No, it isn't. That's the power of my belief system, the belief system that they were taking over my life. I manifested that. And it's clear to me now. But then I felt like I was completely out of control. I mean, there were days I felt like I could take on the world. And then there were days I felt suicidal, like my life was over. And so at 20 years old, I got a bipolar diagnosis, which was a few years after my father had gotten the same diagnosis. Only then it was called manic depression. He went on lithium and I had watched him go on lithium for like 6 months and it made him flat. Took this dynamic man who could be wonderful, but scary also. And it just made him flat, which to me was even scarier. Took away his entire personality. So when I was prescribed it, I was like, no way, I'm not doing it. I'll deal with my mood swings. Thanks very much. I'm not bipolar. I have a dynamic personality. And as I've gotten older, it's leveled off. I'm not going to lie. The last 6 months of my drinking, I settled into being an alcoholic. I had quit all the other drugs. I was only 21 years old and I had shakes. I had an ulcer. So it hurt me to drink. It was physically painful and sometimes it would make me throw up. I wasn't getting hammered. I wasn't partying. I was drinking alone. I was drinking all day. I was driving around drunk. I was going to work every day. I did go to work every day. I would come home. I'd walk to the bar and I would sit by myself and I would drink. So I spent my money. So I spent my time. I was no longer dating men or seeing men, which had been part of my issue. I was no longer socializing with anyone. Everyone else's life was moving on but mine. In the meantime, my dad had the big house in the country. My parents had gotten divorced. And I didn't know this, but he had started research and he was taking in young men into his home that he met in AA. And he was giving them a message that there was no such thing as alcoholism or addiction, that they had developed habits that just weren't serving them well anymore. They had lost their way and that they could change their lives. And he was going to show them how to do it, that they had to change their beliefs about themselves. And he had told me the same thing. And I was a psych major, so I didn't believe him, but I was intrigued because I was watching these young men. I had a thing for young men. I was a young woman and I was watching them from a distance. Have fun, be happy, go to concerts, go bowling, go do fun things that people do, not drinking, not using drugs. I'm not going to lie. There was one particular man that I met who I thought was older than me, but he wasn't. He was just a little bit more mature than me at the time. And I fell for him. And it was Mark's best friend who he'd kind of brought into the fold. He was a year and a half sober at the time. They were all in AA. He was doing AA with them, but not really. Dad was kind of teaching around AA. He was like, no, you're not powerless. Nobody's powerless. At the tail end, the very last few days of my drinking, I was very sick. And I don't know if I had the flu or what happened, but I didn't get out of bed. I told my mother I wasn't going to work and I detoxed myself. It took probably 3 or 4 days. And I had left my dog. I had a dog, but it got to be Sunday. It was a Wednesday or Thursday that I had gotten sick. And it got to be Sunday and I hadn't drank. And I started feeling better. And I thought, shit, I got to go see my dog. And so I went out to my dad's house to see the dog and nobody was there. None of the guys were there. And I was grateful because I still didn't feel great. But my dad was there. And he asked me a question he'd asked me a million times before. He said, are you happy? And I was always able to say, yeah, and blow him off and move on. And I couldn't. I broke down. I cried. And this was a man I was terrified of and I didn't really like all that much. But I believed he had an answer for me. My life is a mess. I quit drinking and I think I'm done. I quit drugs, but I don't know what to do. And at that time, the only thing he knew to tell me to do was go to AA. But what he really wanted to say, which I'm glad he didn't, was stick around me and you'll learn. Because I wasn't willing to do that. But he wanted to hook me up with some of the women who weren't part of his study at that point in time. Here I am. I had been going to AA as a child of one of the members for, at that point, probably 12, 13 years. And I was about to go to a meeting for myself. And it was terrifying. I spent a good 9 or 10 years going to meetings. And for about 7 or 8 of those, I went to meetings every day. That man and I got together. We shouldn't have, right? You're not supposed to in the first year. We got all kinds of shit for it. We first did it on the down low, but I've been with him now 35 years, and we've been married for 33 years this year. We have 3 children and 3 grandchildren, and we've been through a lot together. I've learned so much this past 36 years about life, about myself, about addiction. I am an expert. I can help anybody solve their addiction. It seems like I learn more and more every day about the immense power of the human mind to figure out anything, to overcome anything, to change your beliefs about anything. It's tremendous what we were born with. That's my story. It can go a lot longer, but I think it's been long enough. If you want to learn more, watch a lot of our videos. We talk about it on our podcast. We have 260 episodes of our podcast. You can get one-on-one coaching with us. You can see our workshops. Some of our workshops are live. You can go to our online program, and once a month, you can talk with us live for 2 hours, just as an online program subscriber. We've built so much, and Mark is like a brother to me. I feel like we've grown up together building this, as this is our baby. My dad is long since retired, and this is a pretty good legacy, I would have to say. For all the things he did wrong, starting this was the right thing.